Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is One Piece East Blue Saga Orangetown Arc, Episode 4, Luffy's Past, The Red-Haired Shanks Appears. Our episode in a nutshell gives us a brief summary of exactly what's going to be happening within this episode. Luffy and Zoro are floating aimlessly when Luffy almost loses his hat, prompting a flashback to how he got the hat in the first place, as well as where he got his devil fruit powers from. And now we'll go into a more detailed summary, scene by scene, and give our opinions as we go. Alright, so our episode opens on a black sail with Buggy's pirate mark on it, and three pirates are laughing around a treasure chest, saying how Buggy won't be mad at them now that they have this much treasure, when they spot a lone boat floating a short distance away. They decide to pull up alongside the boat where Nami is draped over the edge, begging for water and for help, gesturing to a chest that happens to be on the other side of the boat from her, saying that it's all she has. The pirates then go over to the chest and start trying to pick the lock, but once they open it, a panda head on a spring pops out at them. And then when they look back at their ship, it's pulling away with Nami helpfully providing a weather forecast, saying that a ship of the size of the one they're on is going to capsize in the coming storm. It then shows that the storm catches up with the ship, the rain comes down, and the ship does indeed capsize, while Nami promises to take care of the treasure as the panda head bobs on the ocean. Now, not much to say about it. It's just Nami switching ships. We get a little bit more information about Nami's character. And obviously, she is a character, and I think I mentioned in the past, whose emotion kind of changes from scene to scene. She's got quite a few different facets to her personality. And when I was watching this, I realized that could just be kind of like foreshadowing her nature as a combatant as well, as we do know that she has a connection to the weather. And the weather is very changeable, especially on the sea. So I've started to kind of think maybe there's some foreshadowing there that her being able to change from emotion to emotion, is she a good actress? Or maybe she's just changeable, like the weather that she happens to be pretty associated with in the later series, like later parts of the series. We then see Luffy and Zoro back in their boat. Luffy's hanging off the side of the boat, complaining about his hunger, while Zoro's just sort of lounging on the other side of the boat, asking when they'll reach land. Luffy says he doesn't know when they'll reach land as they're just going with the wind and waves, but is sure that they'll eventually reach land at some point. Zoro asks aggressively that isn't it weird someone trying to be the Pirate King doesn't have any navigation skills? But Luffy, of course, says that it's not weird, and he's just been drifting around before, he met Zoro, and then he turns it back on Zoro, saying that he's a bounty hunter who wandered the high seas. What about him? And Zoro says that he never called himself a bounty hunter, but that he left his home island in order to find someone, and then couldn't find his way back. So he went after bounties in order to pay the bills. Luffy then makes the comment, oh, so he's just lost. But Zoro gets angry at him, for putting it that way. Obviously, he doesn't think that he's lost. And, of course, in his anger, he rocks the boat, and Luffy's hat is caught by the wind, and it lifts off his head as Luffy flashes back to Shanks, playing with the hat, saying how dear it is to him, having been with him through many a fight, and telling Luffy that he can't give it even to him. They both then chase after his hat, and it goes up the sail, it goes through the air, across the boat, they're both after it, and finally, eventually, Luffy's hat is caught by Zoro, and then when Zoro's hand when reaching for it morphs into Shanks's hands, and we then see Shank catching it and putting it on his head. Obviously, this is our first hint at Zorro's running gag of not having any sort of sense of direction whatsoever, which is always a fun moment when he goes running off to goodness only knows where and ends up in some odd locations. So this is our first foreshadowing and look at his horrible sense of direction, a little bit more of getting to know his character, and also then an excellent segue into the origins of Luffy's hat. And maybe I'll speak more on it at the end of the episode, but one thing I've always wondered about is whether or not Luffy's actually ever going to give that hat back. I mean, this entire show, his entire crew, himself, they're all branded around this straw hat. He is the Straw Hat Pirate. He has a Straw Hat Pirate crew. His pirate mark has a straw hat, and yet we learn that the hat isn't actually his, it's Shanks. It's the binding of their promise. So say Luffy achieves his dream, fulfills his promise, becomes the Pirate King, and then he just gives the hat over back to Shanks and loses like his entire branding at the same time. I don't know how that would like I don't know how I'd feel about that or how that would even really work out because by that point especially everything that Luffy's kind of built is around the brand of Straw Hat. And then he has no Straw Hat anymore. He still would have all of his skills, all of his friends, all of his accomplishments. So I mean, I'm not saying he's not going to be king anymore. That's not his crown, but I do think it would be really odd. And I wonder if we're going to get that moment of, at the end of the series, which hasn't ended yet, so it is just speculation whether he's actually going to give the hat back to Shanks, but then the Shanks is going to like take it and then say, you know what, no, now it's yours, keep it forever, or whether he's going to give it back and Shanks is actually going to take it and go running around with a straw hat, even though it's Luffy's brand, and just confuse everybody in the world about, okay, what happened to the straw hat? I'm just saying, like, they make it very iconic. That's his brand, that's his calling card, that's his trademark. But now we're learning that's not actually his. And it does make me curious about how they're going to end the show, whether he gets to keep it or has to give it back, or whether he gives it back briefly and then gets to keep it forever on because he's achieved everything that he meant to achieve with it. Very curious. And I just wanted to call out that curiosity. So now we find ourselves within a flashback. We see Shanks and his crew having a jolly old time, drinking in a bar. And at the bar, Luffy begs Shanks to take him with him because he wants to be a pirate too. While Shanks just laughs at him, saying, as if he could ever be a pirate. Ben Beckman watches, as does Lucky Row and Yasopp from a table nearby. Yasopp then tells him, just being a good swimmer doesn't mean that he's going to be a good pirate, and Luffy claims that he can fight too with punches like pistols. Bit of foreshadowing. Lucky Roo then says that he's too young, and Yasopp comments he's the same age as his kid. Again, a little bit of foreshadowing. While Luffy protests that he's a grown-up and gets really frustrated by nobody taking him seriously. Shanks then passes him a glass of juice, and Luffy comes right down, thanking him and drinking some. Before Shanks then makes fun of him for really being a kid, and he gets upset saying that he isn't being fair, while everyone in the bar laughs, and Makino watches on with a smile. Higuma, who is a mountain bandit, then kicks off part of the entrance, kind of like those old western doors. I don't know what they're actually called, but the ones that like flap about in the wind. Kicks off half of that and comes in looking for drinks. Lets him know they're mountain bandits, they're not here for lives, they just want the alcohol, but Makino has to inform them that unfortunately they're all fresh out. Higuma looks around, sees everybody drinking, and then Shanks says that they've drank the place dry, offering to give him an unopened bottle. Higuma smashes the drink onto the counter, bragging about the 8 million berry bounty on his head, saying that offering one bottle was an insult to him. Shanks, of course, having manners, being someone with manners, decides to help Makino clean it up, and is disparaged for this by Higuma, who makes more of a mess, telling him, basically calling him a wimp, servant, etc., before he leaves. Obviously, I appreciate this scene because it is a common trope in anime for people to just go off because they're strong, because they have the capacity, they just go off and be violent. You've insulted me. I will now burn your town to the ground. And they just go off because they can. And it never really stops to address that just because you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should be doing it. That just because you can use violence, just because you are powerful enough to win, it doesn't necessarily mean that for any mildly annoying situation, you have to cause a scene. You have to make a big deal about it. You know, sometimes you can have a little bit of grace, a little bit of humility, a little bit of security in yourself to be like, it's a mild annoyance. I can get over this. It's not that big of a deal. Like one in some anime or even like manhwa from like the Chinese version of manga, sometimes you'll have someone they like just bump into their shoulder and they're like, "Cut off your own arm. How dare you bump into my shoulder with that arm? You need to cut it off. Do it now." And it's like, "Okay, wow, calm down. You don't need to do that." And I love that this show is kind of giving you the opposite lesson, they just bump into you, mild annoyance. Even though you could retaliate, you don't have to. And also kind of the cliche, we'll quote Spider-Man, you know, with power comes responsibility and all that jazz. And Shanks is kind of teaching Luffy that lesson or showing Luffy that a little bit in this scene. And I think that it's a very good lesson that a lot of anime, like I said, simply don't teach. And I love it. So once the bandits have made their way out, Makino then comes over to make sure that Shanks is all right, and Shanks, along with the rest of his crew, kind of burst into laughter, completely unbothered. Luffy, meanwhile, has been absolutely seething in silence and starts to yell at Shanks for not fighting back and laughing at him, calling him uncool and not a man or a pirate. Shanks then, you know, kind of tries to calm down, tells him that he understands, but points out that he only had a little bit of booze spilt on him, which isn't really worth getting mad over. Luffy then kind of is done with the whole conversation, says whatever, and turns away before happening to notice that there is a little bit of fruit in a box to the side. Shanks, of course, hears him eating and laughs at him for eating out of frustration before realization sort of dawns on him, and he panics, asking what exactly Luffy is eating because he knows what was over there. He then realizes, sees the empty box, sees what's left of the fruit, and tells him to spit it out. He grabs him by the ankles and starts shaking him, trying to get the fruit out of him. But then, instead of the fruit coming out, Luffy's legs stretch and he face plants onto the floor before he then bounces back up with the most shocked and confused expression on his face. Shanks then informs him of the consequences of eating the devil fruit. It has turned his body to rubber, but it has also made him lose the ability to swim for the rest of his life. Luffy screams, "No way!" And then Shake essentially calls him a dumb bum. Obviously, super cute that Luffy, in his adorable child status, you know, grabs just like is super upset and decides that the only thing he can do is like eat the emotion away and grabs the first thing he sees, which happens to be the fruit. Adorable behavior. And then this is also the first time that we are learning the consequences of the devil fruits. So first time we hear about them, we simply know what they're called. Then the second time that we hear about them, we learn that they give powers and that the secret to them lies in the Grand Line. And now this is the third time that we are hearing about it yet again. And this time we're now getting the consequences added on to everything else, which is that you are no longer able to swim. So basically, the ocean has turned against you. And this, of course, makes sense, as in most scenarios, power comes with a price. And this is the price for the devil fruit power, which, honestly, if you were going to live on land, is a very mild price to pay. But as Luffy wants to be a pirate, which is all on the water, it becomes more of an impactful price for him. So we open the next scene kind of after a bit of a time skip may have happened in the flashback, and we see Makino's restaurant or bar is trashed and empty, and she is running down the street. We then see Luffy getting thrown against the barrel of a well, while Higuma says that people were drinking and having a good time, asking why he had to make a scene. And Luffy, in all his childish confidence, demands that he apologize for laughing at Shanks. Higuma then just stomps on his face, asking if he offended him, and Luffy tells him that he did offend him. Back with Makino, we then see her reach the mayor, who has possibly the best name ever given to a character in the history of time. His name is Whoopslap, and they then run together while Makino flashes back to the bandits being in her restaurant or her bar, kind of making fun of the wimpy pirates, and Luffy getting offended and calling for them to stop, calling them stupid, and her being unable to stop Luffy, which leads to the current situation where Higuma is now reaching for his sword, saying that no one's ever made him this mad and lived. Whoopslap asks him to stop, pleading for him to let the boy go, saying he doesn't know what Luffy did or intend to fight him, but offers to pay them for whatever the offense was in order for them to spare Luffy's life. Higuma then makes a comment complimenting the senior citizens for knowing how the world works, but says that it's too late and he's too angry, and he pulls his sword out. Luffy calls him a bad guy and mountain ape, and Higuma tells him that he can repent in the next life, while Makino and Whoopslap yell out in worry and fear. And then Shanks and his crew arrive behind them, and Shanks comments that he'd wondered why the bar was empty, and so this is where everybody was. Once again, I'm going to call it Whoopslap is the best name ever, and that's comedy all on its own. Now, I know the lesson we're trying to teach Luffy here is that you don't have to get pissed off for minor offenses. It can lead to more trouble than it's worth. But Higuma is an adult, and Luffy is a child, like a small child at this point. Like, I don't know, I would guess maybe like 6 or 7. I'm sure they've probably told us in the manga or another media, but it's not really mentioned in the show. So, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, like he's a very young child. Children say things, children do things. Children do not have full control of their emotions. Higuma is an adult. He should not be running around having this vendetta against a little kid, fighting against this little kid, threatening to kill this little kid. It's a very bad look for Higuma. So immature, despite the fact that he is an adult and Luffy is a child. On the other hand, though, we also have to point out that Luffy really isn't helping himself at all. I mean, it's a good thing that he grew out of this attitude. Let me tell you, if I had met him like this first, I may not like him as much as I do now. But honestly, you've got a person like 10 times your size threatening to kill you, and what do? You call him a bad guy and a mountain ape. You make demands of him despite having no way to see those demands through. He has his foot on your face for half of this scene, and you're still going on being aggressive. And it's like, God, Luffy, just help yourself out here. You can think something and not have to say it. Now, I know, again, the lesson we're trying to teach here. So he has to do these things. But I'm just sitting there watching like, oh my God, kid, you're going to get yourself murdered because you are not shutting up. And this is bandits. These are bad people. And obviously, there can be good bandits, there can be good pirates, there can be bad bandits, bad pirates, good marines, bad marines. This entire series very much lives in the shades of gray, where there's good and bad on all sides, really. But in this case, these are bad bandits. They have weapons, they have multiple people, they have a foot on your face, And you're there yelling and calling them names and making demands of them like it's going to make a difference. I think even a child, even a small child, would maybe be able to see the odds stacked against them and be a little bit less provoking. But either way, it makes for a little bit of good comedy because you're just like, this is ridiculous behavior. Obviously, not meant to be logical, not meant to be serious because no one who is serious would act that way. Now that Shanks and crew have arrived, Higema makes a joke about Shanks cleaning up the village, or something along the lines of, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something like, oh, he'd wondered where the pirates had gone, thought you were cleaning up the village, blah, 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 you know. Shanks, of course, ignores him in order to talk to Luffy directly and tell Luffy that he thought his punches were as strong as pistols. He, of course, is then told to shut up by Luffy, who still has a foot on his face. Hikima then claims not to know why they're there, but warns them to leave before they get hurt, and if he comes any closer, his goon will blow his head off. We then see that Shanks has a gun pointed to his head by said goon. But he keeps it, says if he's going to draw his weapon, he's putting his life on the line, and saying that weapons aren't made for threatening people. Rue then with it, like Lucky Rue without any sort of warning, then just shoots the goon, and then takes a bite of his meat chunk, which he was carrying around, while everyone else reacts kind of with shock. Obviously, the implied message being weapons aren't for threatening people, they are for killing people. The bandits, of course, then get mad at them for interfering, and Shanks and crew ask if they thought they were dealing with saints, noting to them that they are pirates. Duh. Shanks then lectures that he can deal with minor insults, laugh and forget about it, but if they go after those he cares for in order to hurt them, then no matter what the reason is, they're going to have to pay for it. Higema, of course, laughs, ordering the bandits to attack, and that's when Ben Beckman steps forward and says that he's going to handle it, that it's easy enough, and then using his gun like a bat, he defeats all of the bandits before he points the barrel of the gun at Higuma, saying that if he wanted to pose a challenge, he'd need to bring a warship or something. Obviously, Luffy, still under the shoe, is shocked by the strength of Shanks's crew, having not seen them fight before. Higemo, of course, now realizes that he has screwed up and begins to panic and makes the excuse that Luffy attacked him first. But Shanks and crew obviously don't back down, so he then throws a smoke bomb in order to escape. And when the smoke clears, Shanks realizes that he's also taking Luffy, and he panics, wondering what to do as his crew tries to calm him down. Obviously, once again, we have Shanks kind of teaching the life lessons, kind of clarifying the point he had tried to make earlier of minor insults are fine, you can shake those off, but if it's something serious, like they're trying to hurt someone you care about or posing like a serious threat, then, that's when you use the power that you have to make that difference. So, obviously, there's that. And then, kind of to my point before, Higema making the excuse, well, this tiny child attacked me first. That's why it's okay I'm doing all of this. He's a tiny child. He's an adult. It's seriously like he thought like, oh, well, this kid was mean to me, so don't hurt me would work. Like, it's a kid. You're an adult. Deal with it. But then also we get a little bit of like the comedy where like we see Shanks can be kind of like Luffy where he's at first, being very serious. They're fighting, and then as soon as Luffy's escaped, he like reverts back to immaturity and is like, "Oh my gosh," both hands on his head, shocked expression like, "Ah, he's gone. What do I do? What do I do?" He kind of like gets that immaturity, which is a little bit of after like a more serious scene, Luffy going missing, kind of bringing back the levity to it so that it's not as dark because this isn't a dark series. It is meant to be more lighthearted and comedic, and this brings it back to that realm from what otherwise might have been a more serious or darker turn that it was taking. And so we find out what happened to Higema and Luffy. Higema has taken Luffy out onto a boat into the ocean and is dangling him over the side of the boat, thinking that he's made a clean getaway, as they'll never expect a mountain bandit to go out to the sea. Luffy is struggling and flailing, and it's unfortunately failing to make any sort of difference other than, making Higema dislike him more. Higema then throws him into the water, and Luffy regrets not being able to hit him even once, while Higema laughs at him drowning as because he's no longer able to swim, as a giant sea king then rises up behind him and eats him. Once he's eaten Higema, the sea king then kind of eyes down Luffy. He does then try to attack Luffy, but misses him because Shanks, in the nick of time, grabs Luffy out of the way. Shanks then gives the Sea King a death stare, telling him to get lost, and the Sea King reasonably becomes scared and quickly leaves, swimming away. All the while, Luffy is clinging onto Shanks, crying, and Shanks tells him that Makino told them everything, and he's grateful to Luffy for standing up and fighting for them, telling him not to cry, but Luffy keeps crying even harder because Shanks has lost his arm. The Sea King managed to bite off his arm when he was saving Luffy. Shanks then tells him that it's just an arm, and that he's more glad that Luffy is all right. Now, obviously, this is a pretty harsh way to learn that actions have consequences and to pick your battles, but it's also a lesson that I think is going to stick. And we obviously see from the future Luffy that it does, in fact, stick. Obviously, Luffy was reckless. Luffy went for revenge for someone else. Luffy interfered. Luffy had to get aggressive and riled up, and the result was somebody that he deeply cares about, a father figure of sorts, has now lost his arm. Obviously, also learning to pick your battles. That's what Shanks was trying to get at all along, so that's the main lesson as well. And then we have to think, had Shanks not lost his arm here, given what we will in the future find out about Shanks and his status in the Grand Line, etc., imagine what he would have accomplished had he had both arms the whole time. Just something to speculate on. Very interesting. And then, of course, we get that very sweet moment between Luffy and Shanks where Luffy's been saved, then he's crying, and Shanks is trying to calm him down, like the Sea King's gone, but then Luffy's like, that's not why I'm crying because you've lost your arm. And then he's like, it's worth it because I saved you, and it's just so sweet. And then we also get a little bit of foreshadowing with that Death Stare. Now, at this point, we don't know what that Death Stare is. It's going to be several sagas in before we get what exactly Shanks was doing there, but it is foreshadowing that it was even thought about way back then, at the start of the series, that this power was going to exist. We then get a nice wrap up to our flashback, where Shanks and crew are loading up their ship with supplies as they're about to be sailing off while the rest of the town watches. Luffy, of course, comments that he's leaving, and Shanks confirms it, saying he bets that he'll miss him. Luffy confirms that he will miss him, but that he's not going to ask him to bring him along this time or anymore, as he's going to instead make his own crew someday. Shanks sticks out his tongue childishly and says that he wasn't going to ask him anyway, and that he'll never be a pirate. And Luffy yells at him that he's going to have a crew just as good as his. He's going to find the greatest treasure, and he's going to become king of the pirates. Obviously, Ben, Rue, and Yasopp are all looking on indulgently from the side, and Shanks says basically that Luffy's planning to surpass him. He then smiles, takes off his hat, and then holds it on Luffy's head, saying that in that case, he'll leave this with him, the hat with him, as it's dear to him, and tells Luffy to take good care of it. Luffy starts crying beneath the hat, and then we see all of the village waving goodbye to the ship as Shanks and crew are setting off. And then Shanks voice overs for Luffy to bring it back to him once he's become a great pirate, saying that this is their promise as Luffy holds the hat in his hands, crying. Obviously, beautiful scene to wrap up the flashback. We see Shanks setting off on his own adventures. Luffy's promised to have his adventures, which he is now in this series just setting off on. We learn the backstory of how he got his powers. We learn about the hat, its significance to him. It's the symbol of their promise. It once belonged to a father figure or a parental figure. Well, father figure, he's a guy. Father figure who once owned the hat and lost an arm for him, and the important life lessons that he was taught by this person. And so all in all, it's like a great scene, a great way to end the flashback, kind of brings you full circle, and then we go into the next scene. So returning to the present, we have Luffy holding the hat in the same way that he did as a child, kind of morphing from child holding the hat into adult holding the hat and staring at it while spaced out. Zoro warns him that if he spaces out, he'll lose the hat again and asks him, "Isn't it important?" Luffy, of course, smiles again, puts his hat back on, thanking Zoro, who then leans back to lounge on the boat, again commenting on his hunger. Luffy then just happens to glance up at the sky and see a bird flying overhead and decides that they're going to eat it. Zoro asks how, and Luffy decides to rocket up, but the bird was a lot bigger than it appeared, and Luffy's head is caught in its beak as it flies off with him. Zoro, of course, is shocked and yells after him, calling him a moron and asking what he thought he was doing, not that Luffy can hear him at this point, while rowing frantically after this bird. Obviously, the three buggy pirates that we met at the beginning of the episode are floating around as their ship, Nami's ship, had capsized, and Zoro rose up, telling them to jump on if they want to, on their own, but he isn't stopping. And then when they actually do get on as he passes, he tells them that he's impressed that they actually managed to get on the boat. They then try to threaten him, but obviously they are no match. And they end up rowing for him with little bumps and goose eggs on their heads, while he complains that they made him lose sight of Luffy, telling them to keep paddling while saying that he knows Luffy's going to do something once he's able to spot land. The pirates then wonder amongst themselves what they're going to tell Buggy about their boat and treasure being stolen, and Zoro asks who Buggy is, so the pirates tell him that he's a pirate who ate a devil fruit and is an all-around terrifying person. As we then zoom into the symbol on his hat before it switches into a flag with the same symbol blowing in the wind. Obviously, I want to note the transitions between each of the scenes from scene to flashback, flashback to present, now the buggy hat into the flag. They're all very great transitions. This episode is killing it with those. Obviously, it's a little short comedic scene that kind of sets up for the next episode when they're going to actually arrive where they need to be. Obviously, Luffy, you see the bird, you think it's closer than it is, you rocket up to it, and then turns out it's giant. It's huge. And all around, a funny scene. And so we come into our little teaser scene. We see Buggy's circus ship, which is our second theme ship. So his circus ship and a deserted town. We see Nami running through the streets with the Grand Line map while a group of pirates, all in circus-like getups, chase after her, worrying about what Buggy will do to them if they don't get the map back. Meanwhile, we see a tent that looks like a big top tent with a throne inside of it. And then a crew outside spots Luffy in the bird's mouth flying above them, and Buggy orders it from within his tent to be shot down, and a cannon is fired. Nami and the pirates chasing her all turn to look at the sound of the cannon, and they watch then as Luffy falls screaming from the sky before landing in between the two groups, Nami on one side, the pirates on the other. Luffy sits up in a small crater, perfectly fine, asking why cannonballs are shooting at him, but then he stands up, dusts off his clothes, and says that it was a neat experience now that he's safe. Nami and the pirates, of course, just kind of stare at him in shock. Obviously, once again, I love Buggy. I think he's amazing. I am so happy that we're into the arc where we get to see Buggy again. Well, for the first time. One of the best characters. Of course, we're only teased with his presence. We don't actually get to see him yet. But still, puts a smile on your face, makes you very excited, want to watch the next episode immediately because you get to see Buggy. And then, of course, it's an excellent setup. We now know that Nami's involved. She's there too. So this is, again, another connection between them as we know she is going to become crew and also kind of sets up a little bit of a cliffhanger to go into the next episode and find out what's going to happen next. And so we come to the part of the rankings where we get to rank our episodes. And we rank again on two lists, the mostly objective list and the personal ranking list. All right, so we have our mostly objective rank values, and I've highlighted those that apply. So in this episode, really we're all positives. We have our multi-arc supporting character introductions in introducing Shanks, Lucky Rube, Ben Beckman, and Yassot, and those are all worth 3 points each, which already brings us above 10, and there's no negatives. So it is a 10 out of 10 episode. But we also have some multi-arc main character development in that we are learning about Luffy's origin, his backstory, where his powers came from, the significance of the hat, lots of things being developed for him as a character, and that of course is worth the 4 points. We also have the world building aspect in that we are now learning also the consequences to eating the devil fruit that was introduced previously, and that again is another 4 points. So overall total, we have 20 points in this episode, but the maximum score is 10, so again, a 10 out of 10 episode. We've also entered into our new arc, so we are now ranking the episodes of each arc against each other. This is the first episode of the arc, so it's automatically in first place for now. And so we have first on our mostly objective ranking, Luffy's past, the red-haired Shanks appears. Now for my personal ranking. So I also really, really liked this episode. It has comedy. It catches you in the feelings. It sets up well for the next episode. Everything about it is great, except one thing. Because little Luffy is adorable, but he's also kind of annoying, honestly. Like, obviously he hasn't learned his life lesson yet, so he had to be annoying first so he could learn his lesson, and now he's not annoying at all. But I feel like the little bit of annoyance that I felt that his adorableness couldn't counter is a -1. So I ranked it personally as a 9 out of 10 episode because pretty much everything else about it was perfect. And of course, we also get our teasing of Buggy, which amazing. So also for me, on the personal ranking, as it's the only episode, it's also the first episode, and that again is Luffy's past. The red-haired Shanks appears in first place so far. So we now then move into our saga ranking so far. And we have our Romance Dawn arc, which we've completed already there, and we are now starting the Orangetown arc's scoring. So in this arc, we have a total of 5 episodes, therefore the maximum score is going to be 50. And with our first scoring of the mostly objective at 10, we now have a score out of 10 out of 50 on our objective side, and on the personal ranking, I gave it a 9, so we have a 9 out of 50. Again, once we finish the series, or rather the saga, we'll then know the percentage score for each arc and be able to rank those arcs against each other to see which ones are the best and which ones are maybe the worst. And then that just brings us to our reminder that the series ranking so far for the East Blue Saga, Arc 1 was a 9 out of 80, and on the personal side, a 5 out of 80. And with that, we have now rewatched and ranked One Piece, East Blue Saga, Orangetown Arc, Episode 4, Luffy's Past, The Red-Haired Shanks Appears. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you in the next episode.